Okay, so you must have yourself like been when you were in this kind of way of seeing this blend of kind of worldviews kind of slammed together.
Yeah.
Like what was the thing that was the hardest for you to shake, or how can I say it? The
Oh,
thing that was the most difficult, basically happy lie that you had to eventually abandon. What was it?
there was a lot. There's two that stick out to me, and they're always intertwined. The law of attraction was a big one,
Okay,
but it
I
wasn't
figured.
just the
Yeah.
law of attraction. It was the idea that I had to unlearn a lot. It was the idea that I didn't have this innate power. And then the experience was also difficult because
Hmm.
all these things happened. I'm looking back and I'm like, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? And so the idea that my experience shaped my worldview, number one, and then love. What was love? Because I was kind of taught that it was a power to create, that if you could harness this love and show love, that you were basically showing God's will. And then the faith aspect, like what do you do whenever you have scriptures that looked like they were teaching these things, like Matthew 7:7, ask, believe, and receive. And then you have Mark 11, I think it's 11:24, 11:14, where it's in essence saying the same thing, that there's power in your prayer, there's power in your thoughts. And I come into contact with Christians who will say the same thing. And I'm like, who
Yeah.
are you listening to? Tell me
Yeah.
who did you
Yeah.
get that from? Because I can guarantee it's probably somebody connected to the Word of Faith movement. And
Well,
then yeah, it's been transported over.
okay, so if there's that many people who are in the Christian worldview who are posing it, not posing, but they actually have positions culturally as teachers,
Yeah.
what eventually helped you to kind of break free of it?
Learning scripture and then realizing what really this movement was. So, in other words, the simplest way I can put this is hermeneutics.
Yeah.
Like actually learning what the Bible
Yep.
says in context
Yep.
was huge for me.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
No, I can tell you that's the thing we see all the time with the work we're doing as chaplains, is that so many people come with just partial ideas, snippets, because they're not taking the time to actually read the text. Actually, they're not even taking it seriously. They kind of see it as a collection of proverbs sometimes, even the books that aren't
Yes.
proverbs. Like
Yes.
they're looking at the historical accounts and reading them like proverbs. It just drives me nuts. Okay, now look, I noticed in this you said something about endless positivity. Okay, I want to talk
Yes.
about that for a second. I think when people hear that term, they just, oh, what's negative about positivity? Right? They see it as like, how can positivity be negative? But what you're saying is that it can be destructive.
Oh yeah.
And okay, so now here's the thing that I think was probably most people would, and maybe you were struggling with this too. How do we distinguish between like toxic positivity and just biblical hope? Right? Like I think that's how they can so easily, teachers can so easily distort this, is because they can find passages where I could, that maybe be talking about biblical hope, but I can pitch them in a way that you're hearing it as this kind of abundance of endless positivity. So tell me how do you critique one without destroying the other?
Well, I think it comes from a element of looking at it under a lens of reality. So you have toxic positive things all the time. Think of, the way I like to put it is toxic relationships.
Okay.
Is if you and you can understand this considering your background. I'm sure you've seen a lot of this
Yeah.
manipulation
Yeah.
where say you're in a relationship where they're grooming you, like they're swooning you, they're bringing you in, they're showering you with all this love, and boy, you feel so good. But there's an element of it that's abusive. Like they can actually come along and take advantage of you because they've already won you over. But look at all the good, right? Look at all the good, but he's so good to me here. And so there's excuses that can be made. So there's one perspective. The other perspective that I think that a lot of people would be more used to is look at the culture. You can have, oh no, you know what? Actually, I'm going to use a parent. I'm going to use a permissive parent for this example because you have the intention of wanting to make somebody happy, your child. And so in doing so, you think that it's actually a good thing if they always love you, if they're always happy, but you actually end up hurting them. Because Junior over here, maybe he's never learned how to he's never had a chance to become resilient or independent or anything
Right.
like that because of your own pain. And so there comes an element of toxicity that comes with things that we think are positive. And then you have the Christian in church who means well. Okay, and they're so sweet, maybe they're so kind, but they don't have the ability to actually maybe critically think about what they're saying because they think it's negative thinking. That's toxic positivity. You come along and you're like, man, I'm having a rough time, this and that. Shh, don't talk like that. Don't say that out loud. You are going to bring that into your life. You got to speak the blood. You got to speak this. You got to speak that. And it's like they don't have the ability to kind of assess the situation, like weep with those who weep, and that there's no innate power over somebody saying these things, that God is ultimately in control. So there's more to say on that, but there are all kinds of proverbs about changing the way you're thinking and to not be just a closed-minded cynic. I get that. There are proverbs about that, and we should be careful about that. That's why there's wisdom in these kinds of things. But there's also wisdom in taking positions that ultimately deny what's true and real because you think that you're being positive when you're entering into this toxic positive space.
Yeah, so much of what you're talking about is about hermeneutics, right? Because I think it's easy
Yes.
to take Proverbs and distort them,
Yep.
especially once you get past like chapter 10 of Proverbs, where they're not they're just come like freely like fortune cookie.
Yes.
One verse may have nothing to do with the next verse. They're just kind of like the collection of Proverbs. They're easy to disconnect. But the same author of Proverbs writes Ecclesiastes, where he's putting these ideas in the context, and it's a very
Amen.
different story, right?
Yep.
So tell me then, where do people in this movement or Christians who have been influenced by this movement, like where do they put suffering? If in other words, like as I'm listening to you, we as Christians understand the role of suffering and how a good, just and gracious, just and merciful, true and gracious God could use suffering in a way that is actually intended for His creation. But what do these folks do with suffering?
They would adamantly disagree with what you just said. 100%. They would say that no, that's not right. God never intends for you to suffer. God cannot do that, right? So they take away the tears from Christianity. That's the way I like to say that, because it comes from the book Brave New World. At the very end, there's the phenomenal monologue going on that puts that whole book in perspective, in my opinion. And one of the main characters, he's basically lamenting that there is no suffering in this world of comfort that you've made this facade, this artificial world, all just to be comfortable. And then he talks about, this greater narrative of you've taken away the tears from Christianity. You've taken away the very thing that can give an answer to suffering. And so the idea is that this is their escape. This is their escape from suffering. If it's I know that sounds cliche, but it is an illusion. It's anything that comes upon you, you've brought to yourself by your own wrong thinking. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I found it to be a very highly dangerous thing that they said, but they were basically in essence saying that viruses and germs don't exist, that it's a conspiracy. And Jim, I understand that, people believe what they do, but that doesn't come from a heart of truth. That comes from a heart of distrust, of fear. You are believing that because of your pain. You're believing that because you don't trust people. Now think about that. I call this the pain point. You have your word for it. I have my word. And a lot of people have been traumatized. And the reason why they don't want to deal with suffering, they don't want to deal with this, is because of their pain. It's not because it's true, but the very answer that they're looking for is in the cross. It's in the suffering of Jesus, of what He did for us. And so they would say that no, God never wills you to be He doesn't want you to suffer. So you have it within your own power to bring about your own personal happiness and success and prosperity. So, and this goes for sickness as well. You can imagine the troubles that this causes, because it's I call this soft legalism, because basically you're coming up with another legalistic way to stay in control. And that's really what it comes down to, is control. People want control. And I say in the Christian message, it's letting go of that control and listening to what Paul said, that it's about being content in the Lord.